Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics, and we do begin today with Jason Perry. He's the director of the Hinkley Institute of Politics up at the University of Utah, here to help us make sense of this election. And Jason, it was a pretty wild one.
Oh boy, it was. You could not write this kind of story.
Yeah, no.
I mean, the roller coaster rides, the races, from the national politics to the locals, this is the kind of stuff we live for, Glenn.
Yeah, a lot of up and down in those final days. Let's start with the 4th Congressional District. Burgess Owens was successful in flipping that seat. Jason, I remember a while back, a lot of candidates looked at that race and said, no thanks, I'm not going to get into that. Burgess took the step, and he was victorious. How was he able to do that?
Well, it's so interesting to see what's happened in this district, and a little bit of history as to how he got to where he was right now. You go back all the way to 2010, which is what's so interesting about this race. This was when the Republicans were in power. They were able to draw the lines. This was not intended to be a district that was easy for the Democrats. It never was, and that's why this is the 4th time that this congressional district has flipped. The 4th time, the 4th person, Democrat, Republican, Democrat, Republican. And this is really about the battle of a couple of counties. When people show up in Salt Lake County and Utah County, whoever really, it turns out these last 2 elections, shows up the most, that's the party that when they pick is the one that's going to win.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little more. When we started seeing the late returns in Salt Lake County, you always figured those would break for McAdams. They didn't. Even the provisionals broke big for Republicans in Salt Lake County. How do you explain the difference? I mean, that was a complete opposite from 2018 to 2020. So how did that script flip?
There are a couple of things that were different in this election than it was in 2018. And one is you look at why people show up. Sometimes they show up for the person, sometimes they show up for the issue. If you look what happened in the last election cycle, a lot of people in Salt Lake County showed up for one big thing. Certainly Ben McAdams, but mostly they showed up for some initiatives, primarily medical marijuana. That was something that so many people showed up for in Salt Lake County. And that was a record turnout. That was somewhere around 82% in Salt Lake County in 2018. A lot of it was about the issues. Also the Independent Redistricting Commission, which may play a role yet again.
Yeah.
But people showed up for that.
Okay. We saw bigger numbers turn out in the south end of Salt Lake County and the north end of Utah County. Really, even more so in the north end of Utah County. How much of this is just the district growing and the demographic changing?
Well, that certainly played into this, and it's going to play into this district for a little while. Salt Lake City and the 4th district part of Salt Lake County has really become a lot of purple. A lot of Democrats are living there, but there's a few Republicans, as we turned out this time. A lot of Republicans and independents showed up last time. But Utah County is a force to be reckoned with. That's another difference between last election cycle and this one. You may recall, Glenn, there were lots of voting issues in 2018, which is why we saw 68% turnout in Utah County. This time it was about 89%. So we saw a lot of people showing up in Utah County to vote, and those votes largely went to Burgess Owens.
Let's talk and dig more into Salt Lake County. The county council, one Democrat who wasn't running against anyone else, is the only one that won on the Salt Lake County Council. How does Shireen Gorbani lose her seat on the Salt Lake City Council? The same reason for Ben McAdams, or is it different because she had countywide?
We're just really seeing this interesting impact down ballot. You look at what happened in the last couple of election cycles and the people who showed up. I think it was largely for those issues, but this time we saw people split their tickets. This is the first time, what's interesting in Utah, when you could not vote straight party. Sometimes we saw that in last election cycles. You would show up and you picked your party. You couldn't do that this time, and I think that played a big role in this election cycle. People went person by person. Some people talk about, I just really went by issue and I went by person instead of just party. That's what happened right here, and the reality is there was no blue wave. People thought that was going to happen.
Yeah.
We've talked about maybe it was kind of a blue mirage because we thought some of these people were going to win. We thought Shireen Gorbani was doing very well up to the end, but in the end, the last minute voters, the people that showed up that last day, voted for the Republican candidates.
We also saw some House seats that looked like they were going to flip in House Districts 38 and 39, and even 45. Representative Elison was caught in a dogfight in District 45, but those all flipped again. And again, kind of goes back to my point, is how did the provisionals even break break toward Republicans.
Well, they did this time. And you look at those local races, and this was by not very many votes. In fact, you talk about Representative Elison, for example, people are sending him condolence letters. They're saying, I'm sorry it didn't work out for you this time. But it turns out the people that voted late, the people who turned in their ballots late, the people that showed up the day of and cast their ballots, those people largely went to some of these Republican candidates. And most of these Republican candidates, the ones that were close, did end in the win. In the end, Representative Hutchings, who was the longest serving member of our House, was ousted. So there's one of those people that did lose right there. But by and large, that blue wave did not happen in Utah, and certainly across the country, we didn't see it either.
Ashley Matthews beating Hutchings for that seat in District 38. Okay, let's dig into this idea of the blue wave a little more. We saw a lot of controversy surrounded the state legislature when they started making changes to those initiatives. The tax reform bill was very unpopular and even repealed before it could go to a ballot measure. We heard so much from Democrats saying, we're going to come out and we're going to vote these people out of office. They only flipped one seat.
Yeah, none of that had what people thought was going to happen in this election. And I think you look at what happened nationally and then you compare that to what's happened locally too. I think that a lot of these races came down to what's happening right now for all of us. People have been forced to plant a political flag on so many different issues. When it comes to if your kids are in school, when it comes to masks, when it comes to your health care or the economy, people are concerned, and they're actually paying a lot more attention right now to the people who they think are going to be able to help with these key issues for them. I look at that as being a primary issue right here, and the reality is it's not just a matter of politics anymore. It's not just a matter of party anymore. It's about those key issues that people care about.
Let's look at the national scene. Outside of the presidency, a very good night for Republicans. How do you explain that?
Well, this goes to the fact that there were really no great coattails necessarily for Joe Biden. People thought that was going to be what was happening, as Democrats up and down the list were going to be able to do very well. And the reality is they didn't. It's because people made a choice. They made a conscious choice about who they're going to vote for. And there are several people in the country, lots of them it turns out, that were voting for Republicans. They voted for Republicans. They weren't voting for the President of the United States. That is just the difference. What people thought was going to happen absolutely did not happen. Republicans probably going to be able to retain control of the Senate because of that.
So now as we look to the Georgia runoff, that's going to be a key.
Yeah.
What are we going to be watching there? Because now all eyes on the country for control of the Senate are focusing in on Georgia, and it appears that money from all over the country is going to be influencing
this has become the race to watch in the country. I predict this is $100 million or so goes into this race. And when you look at what happened nationally and with the Senate, a lot of people are saying a divided government is good for business. It's good for the economy. When there are these checks and balances in place, that it's good for the country. I think that is the argument we're going to be hearing a lot over the next couple of weeks. This is going to be so interesting. If this doesn't pull out for the Republicans, because this could end up sort of a 50-50 split in the Senate, which means the Vice President of the United States casts every deciding vote. The heart of what's going to happen for the Biden administration going forward, or for the Republicans, is all on Georgia right now. That race, those two races right there for the two senators, is going to change everything for the next 4 years.
And if you would look at the history, you would think at least one of them is going to win this runoff.
Well, I think that's highly likely. I mean, Purdue was so close, even before in the first round of voting going into this runoff election. It's really hard to imagine a time when at least one of those candidates is not going to come through on the Republican side.
Okay. Jason Perry, we always appreciate your insight. Thanks for being on the show today.
Glad to be with you.